So it's my pleasure to come before you all this evening and present the city manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 15-16. Of course, state law requires that the city manager recommend a budget and the city council approve an annual budget. But of course, an annual budget is really just a single year snapshot and doesn't tell the entire story and put things in context of the past, present, and future. So I want to kind of start this evening by looking back a little bit, then discuss where we are right now, and then also look to the horizon. So if we go back and look at where we've been since 2004, just to kind of give us a 10-year window there, we've really been through a lot of difficult challenges in our local economy, and certainly that has impacted the local budget, the city budget. Some of the highlights of that are that people may not recognize is that we're actually down in full-time staff 10% over that period of time. You all are well aware of some of the things we've done with hiring freezes, with a retirement incentive that yielded quite a bit of savings to the city. Basically, we operate, your departments operate on an ongoing basis at less than full staff. We currently have 51 vacancies. We project that we'll have around 30 vacancies in the coming year. We have, in the past, in the current budget, you did approve 6 new positions. 4 of those for the new Catawba wastewater treatment plant that is up and running now. So that's funded out of the utility fund, and 2 in your general fund, and those are the only positions in the last several years. Going back prior to that, some staff was added with the ladder company and the fire department, and then we added police approximately 10 years ago. So your net reduction of employees is actually greater because you've added staff in your public safety departments. We've also absorbed some state revenue losses, and I'm going to talk in more detail about another one of those. But we lost $400,000 in hold harmless funds. And you've strategically and thoughtfully over this period of time looked to move some of the fee-supported departments and functions away from reliance on tax support. So your sanitation function in this budget will be 83.5% self-supporting. You all are well aware of the changes that have taken place in the airport, and we're excited the fact that the airport is 100% funded. So in some ways, as we move forward, it feels a little bit like Dickens' tale, and we're looking at the best of times and the worst of times, because we have some real exciting things going on, but we also have some serious challenges. And this is basically the budget landscape that this year's budget recommendation is dealing with. So there are 3 major aspects of the fiscal year 15-16 budget that I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on, and that's revaluation, the loss of the business privilege license, and then how the implementation of the bond program is beginning to affect the budget. Revaluation, we've talked about that in these chambers recently. We've done a little bit better than the entire county in that our drop in value is 6.56%. That's $244 million loss in value. The state requires you to look at a revenue neutral rate. I think when that law was passed, the thought was that values would always increase, and so they wanted the public to know how much your rate could be reduced to be revenue neutral. In this case, and actually in the prior revaluation, it's just the opposite. We've lost value. So you calculate a revenue neutral rate that actually increases the tax rate so that you're able to collect the same amount of property tax. And we have done that, and that number is 3.95 cents, so 53.95 actually brings in the same amount of revenue as you're currently getting per the state formula. Now, revenue neutral is revenue neutral across the entire tax base. So it's impossible to look at any individual property owner or parcel and say, you know, you're revenue neutral. Some are going to have dropped more than 6.56%. Others may not have dropped as much as that, and some may have even increased. But what I'm looking at and recommending to you all is revenue neutral across the entire tax base. So let's take a little look at how that works when we get down to individual properties. So before revaluation, the average residential value in Hickory was $150,000. At the current tax rate of 50 cents, that tax bill is $750 a year, or $62.50 a month. Now, obviously, values have gone down, so if you just apply that 6.5% decrease to the average home value, your home's now worth $140,160. You calculate the revenue neutral tax rate of $53.95, and you actually have a little bit of a slight increase of $5 a year because, again, it's not perfectly averaged out. Revaluation in and of itself is not a budget buster. That can obviously be dealt with a change in the rate and bring in the same amount of revenue. However, the loss of privilege license is a budget buster. Just to remind the community, the City of Hickory and City Council can only raise revenue that is permitted by the General Assembly. You're only given certain tools by the General Assembly to raise revenues. And the business privilege license had been in place for a number of years, was primarily, in the most recent iteration that the state statutes provided several years ago, primarily was a tax that was paid by the big boxes. The big retailers in Hickory and through other communities were paying a significant amount of the $1.14 million that was raised each year. Some businesses were exempted. Some other smaller businesses paid $50, $100, $150 a year. That was some of the frustration, I think, at the state level. Was it was kind of an archaic process that had been put in place and added to over years and years and years. But instead of reforming it, they simply chose to do away with it completely. And I can't help but be a little cynical in the fact that none of that state revenue. So they didn't have to talk about teacher salaries or cutting any state programs. They could simply do away with that tax and make you all have to deal with that in your budget, and that's exactly where we are today. So effective July 1st, business privilege license is no longer available. $1.14 million loss, and that equates to a 2.7 cent increase in your property tax. I want to pause there for a second and say that I've chosen as your manager to recommend that you recover those funds through the property tax rate. We offer an extremely high quality of amenities to our residents and businesses that are very valued, and you've seen in the previous slide all of the cuts and reductions that the city's made to deal with economic changes and also state revenue cuts. And it's just simply not possible to absorb a $1.14 million reduction annually, every year, without dramatic reductions in the level of service. So let's talk a little bit about the entire budget. Each of your funds is broken down here with the comparison between the current budget, 14-15, and the recommended budget for 15 and 16, starting there at the top. Your general fund is essentially flat, almost exactly the same amount of revenue and expenditure. The utility fund is actually looking at a 10% increase, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then your other smaller, more ancillary funds have some little variations in them, primarily due to capital and some other things, but those cumulatively are less than 2%. Your internal service funds are showing quite a bit of an increase, and that's driven by your capital reserve fund. And just again, public accounting requires us to basically double count some of these things. All of these things down here are actually funded from these operating funds up here. So in some ways, it's just moving money into different accounts and different funds for the way you have to account for them. So basically, of the 6.1% increase that we're showing down here in the total budget, it's really the double counting of your utility projects, which we've got, and I'll talk about them in a little more detail. You've got $5.5 million in projects that are both funded up here, and then the money's transferred and put in your capital reserve fund, where we'll actually enter into agreements to build these projects and purchase a generator. Any questions, comments so far? Okay, so if we want to just kind of do the highlights and an overview, we've mentioned revaluations, so a penny on the tax rate has dropped from 460 to 428. We feel really good about sales tax. That's relatively strong. We continue to have a sound contingency of $650,000. I'm not recommending any new positions. I am recommending that we stay consistent with our pay for performance plan with 2% and 3% increases to our coworkers based on their annual evaluation. And consistent with your long-standing council policy, we are increasing the various fees throughout the city by 0.8%, which is consistent with the 2014 CPI. In the water and sewer fund, that same principle stays in effect for your water and sewer rates. I mentioned the $5.5 million in projects, and you all have actually seen 2 of those already, in that you've appropriated funds to begin design work on the downtown water and sewer line replacements. And then we've also got scheduled a generator replacement at the water plant, which will run, we're anticipating $3 million. In your solid waste fund, I mentioned the moving to being self-supporting, and of course we're implementing the single stream recycling, which I think our residents are excited about. That will enable us to significantly increase the volume and the types of materials that are recycled and not landfilled. And I'm recommending that we continue to move again in this self-supporting mode and actually increase the monthly solid waste fee that each of our residents and businesses with accounts pay from $16.50 a month to $18.50 a month. So those are kind of the highlights. I want to talk next about the third major aspect, first being revaluation, second being the loss of the privilege license, and that's the bonds. Going to look at that in a couple of phases, and first talk more about the impact on your fund balance and discuss that as kind of background, and then we'll kind of come back to that in a second. So typically we don't spend too much time talking about your reserves or the fund balance that the city maintains. But given some of the things that are going on with it this year, and given the impact that your bond projects potentially will have, I think we need to drill into that a little bit more. Currently, you are above your goal of 25%. You're at $13.5 million unassigned in the general fund. Very solid, but there are pressures on that. First of all, we had a flood in 2013, and I still am amazed the incredible job that our public services and police and fire and other folks did to basically keep the city running when we lost some pretty significant infrastructure. But all the dust is basically settled there, and we have finished up the accounting with FEMA. And we had initial outlays of a couple of $1 million. We've gotten a good bit of that back, but we will end up having expended over $500,000 that will not be reimbursed by FEMA. Secondly, in last year's budget, the current year's budget, you chose to appropriate, or basically to double your paving budget to take $450,000 out of your reserves. So that is in the current budget and continues to be in the 15-16 budget. But again, it's an ongoing expenditure that you're paying for out of your reserves. Here's where we start talking about the bond projects a little bit. We've entered into a contract with Freese and Nichols to do pre-engineering work and some cost estimates and other work to start teeing things up for your bond projects. And of course that had to come out of your fund balance because we don't have the bond funds yet. And then we had a kind of an odd situation with our auditors. You all entered into an agreement with CVYSA 2 years ago to put the lights out at the soccer complex. And so we went ahead and booked the donation that CVYSA will make to the city of $125,000, but per the agreement, they don't need to make that, they won't make that donation to us until 2 more years. And so the auditors have basically said you can't hold that out there as a receivable. You've got to let that go, and then when the money comes in, you can account for it. But, you know, basically that's going to then have to come out of fund balance because it was a revenue that you're not going to get. So all of these cumulative give us some pause for concern in that we believe that this may be the first year that there will be pressure on that 25% goal. And it is possible that you'll dip below that. I want to express gratitude to your department heads. Just within the last couple of weeks, I sent them an email and asked them to be even more mindful of their spending as we close out this fiscal year. You all know they do a great job of turning back money and making good decisions throughout the year. I just asked them to be even more mindful of that. They're familiar with all of this. And so we'll see how that turns out. But just looking into next year, again, there's going to be some pressure there on your reserves. Again, and I'll get into a little more detail about the bonds, how those might affect it. But you've also got a number of economic development projects that are in the works that you all are aware of that could require you, if we're successful, and we certainly hope we are, but could require you to tap fund balance in some of the projects that are being discussed. And then you also always have these opportunities for public-private partnerships. I mentioned the Henry Fork lighting. We just had the Tennis Association before you. In some ways, you might look at the Outward Bound donation as something like that, where we've got good partners that come forward and say, hey, if you'll match us, we'll be willing to make a donation to the city. And every time you do in those, and they're great deals because you're leveraging your money, but that is coming out of your reserves. And we don't really know sometimes when those things are percolating out there in the community to come to you. So again, just items that you got to take into consideration as you think about your fund balance. So next I want to just, let's do a summary of the property tax picture. I'm recommending a 56.65 cent tax rate. The current rate is 50 cents. Revenue neutral adds almost 4 cents, and then replacing the privilege license is 2.7 cents. So your total tax rate goes to 56.65. And I want to remind you all that this is the first time in 20 years that you would consider a budget, or you might adopt a budget that has a tax rate increase. So let's go back to this slide a little bit. We talked about, what the average homeowner is paying currently. $750 a year, $62.50 a month. We've already done the math on what revaluation looks like and how that changes their formula. Takes them to $755 a year, or $63.66. Again, the new value after revaluation on average, $140,000 home. Tax rate of 56.65 takes their bill to $794 a year, or $66.17 a month. So when we put it all together, $66.17 is what I would recommend at the tax rate. They're currently paying $62.50, so a $3.67 a month increase in their tax bill, and then the $2 solid waste increase. So basically this budget on the average home in Hickory would increase their monthly commitment to the city to $5.67. Any questions, comments, things I need to cover at this point?
Is the county proposing to raise their property tax too?
I just saw an email that was sent out by the county manager to the employees that says revenue neutral and 1 penny above that. So I guess you could say they're netting a 1 penny, or the city manager's recommending a 1 penny increase above revenue neutral.
But they're not losing any privilege license.
They're not. No, they actually have other things that they want to fund with that. I didn't actually get into that part of it. I just looked right quick to see what the tax rate was.
Can we talk a little bit about that, sort of that fund balance? of course, the contract with Freeze Nichols has been appropriated, and that's a big number. So that's out of this year's fiscal budget.
Correct.
Okay, so that's not in the rollover budget. Do you believe that hitting below 25% could happen? Well, I mean, it's a moving thing. I recognize that. So, sort of, when's it going to bottom out? I mean,
Well, we'll
that's the wrong
know
word.
we'll know definitively the end of July. I mean, when we finished all of our financial statements and the auditors have looked at everything and said, "Yep, y'all got it right," we'll know.
Okay, so we'll know that our fund balance is at that 25% reserve.
Yep.
Or not.
Or not. That's
Or
right.
not. But we're not appropriating any fund balance to next year's budget.
No, you are.
Okay.
But you're appropriating a level that is closer to what we have done in the past, which was break even. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But that includes taking care of the privilege license. I mean, that includes the tax rate that I've recommended. But my caveat to that is, so I'm recommending appropriating fund balance of about 1.4 million, which is closer to what we've done in the past. So, I have a higher level of expectation that over collecting revenues and under expending will cover that. Okay? But what you have not considered, and I can't consider yet, is any of these contracts that will come in to do design and engineering work on your bond projects. That's this piece that concerns me is, okay, and I've actually got a whole other slide to talk a little bit about thinking through that, so maybe I'll just stop there. But that's the piece that's the unknown. And maybe I should just skip to that slide. You want to do that? Continue that conversation?
Well, I have one more question as
Okay,
it relates
sure.
to the budget. When does the merit pay, when the employee evaluations and merit pay increases, are they done at the beginning of the fiscal year?
No, they're done in October.
They're done in, so 3-4 months into the
Yes.
fiscal year. And
Yeah,
that's a one-hit deal. In other words, it's either 3% that one time in October, 2% or whatever.
That's right.
It's not, okay.
That's right. Actually, just to kind of stay with the flow of the presentation, let's come back to the fund balance. Because part of what you have to think about in the whole big picture is what's on the horizon as it relates to potential changes at the state level. So I'm going to ask Assistant to the City Manager Yade Fox to come up to the podium. She's our legislative liaison, does great work bird dogging what's going on in Raleigh and expressing our opinions and your opinions to our legislators to help them understand how their decisions affect us. And I want her to kind of tell you what's going on in Raleigh that could become law. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Mr. Crone. Some of the bills that I'm going to talk about tonight actually it falls into that realm of being a part of the budget, finance, fees, appropriation discussions. So even though these bills have not passed through both chambers, they are still being considered and very much considered what they call alive in Raleigh. So one of the things that I wanted to first talk about was Senate Bill 369. This bill actually changes Articles 39 and 42 from point of delivery to per capita over a 3-year period. Some of the information that we had received back in March from the General Assembly actually said that the city of Hickory itself would lose $2.5 million if this happened. A lot of that is because some of those projections are based off of population growth. Well, some of the things that we have seen from the actual state itself show that we would only grow from a time period of 2010 to 2020 would be 0.8% in growth. So when you use a formula that's going to have something with population as a growth, a lot of times you're not going to see much growth at all, and so therefore we're at a loss. Additionally, this bill actually shows that all of the other municipalities and towns in Catawba County are at a loss along with Catawba County. One of the other bills that's doing something similar is Senate Bill 608, and that's actually Senator Bob Richo's bill. It actually converts local government revenues into state revenues, which was something that's actually put more in an actual bill as opposed to something that could just be done at any point in time. It uses the 1314 base figure with an increase of only 3.5%. As you heard earlier, Mr. Berry said that we're projected currently at a 6% sales tax revenue growth. So obviously that would come as a loss to us. So either way, it doesn't look good. So those are some of the factors that are out there with the sales tax redistribution. One thing I would like to say is that we have heard that a lot of the Senate leadership is having some discussions. They're trying to soften the blow and to stretch it out a little bit more to where it's not such a dramatic impact on a lot of the local governments. We just haven't seen those actual figures yet. They're not public. Another bill that is out in consideration is Lincoln County Representative Jason Sain's bill, House Bill 903. This bill actually provides the opportunity for counties to levy a quarter-cent for public transportation for general purpose without a referendum. It also gives cities a quarter-cent sales tax option that they can levy with a resolution. For the city of Hickory, we ran some numbers, and that would be an estimated $850,000 in revenue. I actually heard today, we had a conference call with some of our sources over in Raleigh, and although this bill is currently sitting in the House Local Government Committee, and then it's proposed to go to the House Finance Committee if it's recommended, it's one of the bills that we have heard might be used for negotiations. So while you may not see it, it didn't fall into the House bill this week, it may still be up for discussion, and so we're hopeful. And then finally, Catawba County and Alexander County Senator Andy Wells has a bill, which is actually Senate Bill 700. I have spoken with you before about this. It's to limit the sales tax refund on nonprofits. This bill would actually cap the amount that are refunded and received by nonprofits. For the city of Hickory, that's approximately about $70,000 that would be coming back to us annually. As we look forward to see what happens this week with the House still continuing to work through their budget, we're trying to just keep track of the different things that's happening and let you know about them immediately as they continue to work through their budget. Once it goes from the House, obviously, then it'll go to the Senate, and then there'll be some more discussion on that.
Any questions of Ms. Fox and what we're seeing in the legislature?
Anybody mention what they're doing with the $400 million in extra money they've collected this year?
No, I'm not aware of that.
We know it hasn't been suggested to be directed to us.
No, but I mean, how much more do they want? It seems like every couple of weeks there's something new to steal money from the municipalities.
Thanks. So, from where I sit, kind of looking at this broad brush, I think there's definitely a move afoot in Raleigh to procure sales tax more to the state budget and less to the local budgets. I think that's some of the models they've seen in some of the other states they've talked to. Senator Rouchot's told us in numerous meetings and in the bills he's introducing, I mean, they basically are trying to figure out, okay, how do we get all of the sales tax to the state, and we'll replace that with an appropriation, as Ms. Fox was saying, to the local governments for a period of time, as would be my guess. I mean, that's how it always tends to work, whether that, whenever they change your ability to tax, they'll give you something to tide you over for a few years, and then it will go away. Broadening the sales tax, there was a lot of conversation about that last session, and including services and all kinds of different things, and certainly Senator Wells' bill starts going in that direction, but of course that's really difficult to do politically. And so I'm not personally that optimistic of that happening. So my reading of the tea leaves is, given what's going on in Raleigh right now, is there's just going to be more and more sense of reliance on the property tax for local governments. Any changes to the sales tax, have a huge hit on your budget. That's our second most important revenue. So that's kind of our understanding of what's going on there. Okay, so next to kind of go back and drill down a little more in Mr. Lell's comments and discussion there about the bonds and how it affects fund balance. So the schedule we're on right now with Freese & Nichols is to have the pre-engineering work done in September. The project and program parameters, that's kind of engineering speak, if you will, for how big can these projects be and how much can you spend on each one of them in broad terms, you know, some budget numbers for them done by January. So certainly by January of 2016, you will have some of your committees, I think, ready to come to you and say, hey, we want to hire some architects and engineers and start designing these things after you all approve the scope and basically say, okay, we're comfortable with X $1 million going on each one of these different projects. Again, from a technical standpoint, you can't go to the local government commission and actually borrow money until you have bids in hand, and of course you can't get bids until you've done the design work, right? So you're going to be in a situation, and design is a significant cost of these projects. It will be. Design and engineering will be a significant part of that. So you are looking potentially toward the end of this coming fiscal year of being in a position to say, okay, we need to award some contracts to keep these projects going forward. And we're not going to get the bonds to pay for them, you know, probably for 6, 8, 9, 10 months, 12 months, depending on how long the design and engineering work takes. So the bottom line is you're going to be in a position, I think, to need to front some of these soft costs, if you will, for your bond projects. And that's where the whole conversation about how much fund balance, you know, you're in a great position, but I mentioned the things that are putting pressure on that. How much will you really need? So a couple of alternatives to consider is, do you want to go ahead and consider a bond tax now? Obviously, you don't have debt service payments due, but you could levy an additional penny and raise $428,000 and start paying for bond projects, design, and engineering work out of that now. It probably would not be enough by itself. Well, I know it wouldn't be. But you would basically be hedging your bets, if you will, using your reserves, but also have a dedicated revenue source coming in to pay for that. Another alternative would be similar in that you use some of your reserves, but maybe you actually go out and borrow some short-term borrowing in order to be able to have cash on hand to pay for the design contracts, engineering work, and then you can pay off that loan and reimburse your reserves if you choose to when you do float the bonds, potentially 2 years from now. Does that make sense? Okay.
What does the state say our reserve has to be?
The minimum is 8%.
8?
Yeah, but if you're at 8, 9, 10%, I mean, you're basically hoping, you're crossing your fingers every time we pay our employees that no checks are going to bounce.
And how does that affect our bond rating?
Adversely at 8%.
No, I'm not talking about 8%, obviously. I'm talking about as we get closer to 25 versus where we are now.
Yeah, you want to have, there's two things we've heard from our financial advisors. They say, A, you want to have a solid reserve, and we're in that category.
When are they considered not solid?
Well, it's a little apples to apples. The numbers they use, the percentages they use don't marry up to our 25% calculation. All they've told us is, yeah, you're in that range. You're in the middle of that range. You're not on the high end, you're not on the bottom end, you're in that range. But the thing maybe that we need to think about more is, the other piece they look at is, are you spending your reserves for operating issues? So basically they want to say, what do you have in reserves, and then what's the trajectory of those reserves? Is the potential that you're going to increase those reserves, or is the potential that you're going to decrease those reserves, and what are you decreasing them for? Now, your history's been great. I mean, even through the recession, even through all the cuts and adjustments, we've actually been adding a little bit to fund balance every single year. And what I've said in those previous slides is that this may be that tipping point year where you actually might start eating into some of those reserves. Again, we won't know definitively until July, close out the books and know for a fact exactly how everything's settled up. But I kind of see some of those things that are out there now that we haven't had out there in the past, that you could actually start eating into your reserves. How much do the bond rating agencies look at that? How much do they weigh that in? We just know it's a factor.
But it's not because we're in distress, it's because we're
projecting is for the bond.
Yeah, part of it's the Freeze Nichols contract. I mean, part of it's,
It's not- it's not a
one-time
negative
expenditure, on all the bridges and the stormwater damage that we did and didn't get reimbursed all of it from FEMA. So, I mean, I think we can make a good argument that the majority of that is one-time funding. Good question. Other comments, questions at that point?
Well, I noticed, I guess the budget's not looking at what the sales tax change could affect. So
Yeah.
if that comes in the next few weeks or so,
Yeah, I kind of doubt they would actually implement it because they know that we're all going to be adopting our budgets in June. We have to. They don't. They do these continuing resolutions and stuff. And so I think, Mr. Seaver, what they would do if they make the changes, they'd say, just like they did with the privilege license, they'd say, okay, effective in 15-16 or 16-17, here's what it'll be. So, because of course, there's no way for me to put together a budget having no idea which of these bills, if any, would pass. And that's, again, they did that with the business privilege license. They gave us a year's notice, basically. So just kind of concluding the presentation, the recommended budget is available on the web. Of course, this presentation in video form will also be available. You have an email from the city clerk with a link to download it to your iPad, asking you to consider calling for your public hearing on June 2nd to get public input. And want to express just, serious gratitude, heartfelt gratitude to Karen Hurley and Melissa Miller. They have been burning the candle at both ends, helping me put this budget together, and they've done all the heavy lifting. I'm the guy that sits there and keeps asking them questions and driving them crazy. But we've had some ups and downs with our computer system and just little things that always happen when you're under stress, and they've just been wonderful to hold it all together and keep us moving forward on the budget. And I don't mean to cut off discussion,
Well,
certainly.
we've got to have it approved by June 30th.
Correct.
And we had a meeting June 2nd and June 16th. 16th, our fallback position is something for to fall through the roof on the 2nd.
Well, but actually, you got to do it in 2 readings. So that typically what you've done is adopted it on first reading on the first meeting in June, and then come back to second meeting and adopt it.
So
on the
if
second.
something falls through the roof, we've got to work it out that night.
Yes, we do. Or hold a special called meeting.
Yeah.
You can do that too.
But we can't approve it until we have the public hearing, so.
Well, that's right.
We
Yeah,
can't
no.
have the public
We gotta
hearing
have
until we
the
call for it, so. You know how it goes.
All right, who's going to make the motion we call for public hearing on the 2nd?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Patton, second by Zagaroli. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. That's unanimous. I'm still not sure what that last slide was asking for, Mr. Burry. I mean, we're sitting there, we got that last slide out there. You want us to just reflect on that for the next 2 weeks?
You mean the second to last slide?
Yeah, the second to last.
Yeah, with your alternatives. Yeah.
The alternative.
Basically, for you all to discuss that or think about it yourselves. Obviously, you don't discuss it outside of this meeting, and then you can discuss it a lot at the public hearing. I mean, that's really where you
All right.
adopt a budget.